Okay, as I told you before, Chapter 11 is probably our shortest, or Module 4 is our shortest module. It consists of Chapter 11, Cash Management, and there's really three main concepts in cash management that you'll need to master to be successful on the test. As far as the competencies for cash management, we're going to explain, you need to explain what is meant by cash management, why it's critically important to the hospitality operations, calculate the opportunity cost and effective interest rate when a compensating balance is required or fees are included as part of a loan package, and finally calculate a cash budget. The opportunity costs are actually an effective interest rate problem as well, but they have to do with simple terms. I know you guys remember the 210 net 30 when you were taking accounting, and what that meant is that you get a 2% discount if you pay within 10 days, and the total bill is due within 30. In real life, there's no discounts. So what this really is it's a loan, and we need to figure out what it costs us if we don't go ahead and pay this within 10 days. And the way we do that is by using this formula down below. And if you look, it says effective interest rate equals percent discount divided by 100 minus the percent discount, and then we multiply that by 365 and the difference between the discount and due date. If you look in the text, they have a couple of formulas in there, and those formulas require you to have an actual invoice. This formula just requires you to plug the terms into it, so it's a lot easier to use. So if we were to look at the last bullet on here, I've plugged in the 2% for the percent discount, so it's just a 2, and 100 minus the percent discount is a 98. So 2 divided by 98 multiplied by 365 divided by 20. 20 is the difference between the discount rate, or the discount and due date. So you take the 30 minus the 10 and you get the 20. And actually you can multiply and divide these in any order because of the multiplicative law, which I'm sure you guys remember. And when you do the math, you're actually being charged over 37% if you don't go ahead and pay this within 10 days. So it's a pretty significant loan that companies have figured out a way to charge us by us not paying on a timely basis. The second example is for the annual interest on a loan. It's the same thing with a compensating a balance. I have both examples in here for you. But if we were to consider the compensating balance as fees, we have the example below. So if we purchased a house for $300,000 at 4%, and we had to pay $10,500 in fees, we're actually paying more than 4%. So the effective interest rate on the loan is 4.15%. And to calculate the annual interest rate, we take the loan amount and multiply it by the interest. So 300,000 times 0.04 gives us $12,000. And then we take the $300,000 and we subtract it by our fees of $10,500, and we get $289,500. And we do the math, and I think it's 4.14 and change, but it's essentially 4.15%. So different loans have different interest rates and different fees, and some home loans actually have points. But if we were just to look at the interest rate on a loan, we can't tell which one's the best deal until we actually figure out the effective interest rate. And if you want to look at it for cash discounts, you can go to 523, and basically what they do is the only difference is instead of having the fees, you subtract out the compensating balance. Okay, and then we need to look at the a cash budget using the cash receipts and disbursements approach. It's real effective if we're going up to 6 months, and it tells us how much cash we have and how much cash we can use, and how much we should have on hand at the end of the period. If we go beyond 6 months, it's just impossible to forecast using this approach because everything changes. Our revenues may change. The way that we get paid for cash and credit may change. Um, our needs may change as far as our purchases. So it's good to do this every 6 months just to make sure we have enough cash to cover all of our needs. And this is an example like one in the book. And what it does is it gives us our sales, it gives us our inventory purchases, it gives us other cash expenses. It says cash, so we pay those in that month. And then we have capital expenses. So if we were planning on buying a large piece of equipment in April, we would put that in there. And then by using historical data, we would know that 30% of our sales are cash and the remaining are credit. And then of those credit sales, 70% are collected in the month of the sale, and the remainder are collected in the following month. And our purchases, we pay for 45% of our purchases in the month of the purchase, and the remainder we pay in the following months. And then finally, if you were to look at it, it says all other cash expenses are paid in the current month. And finally, we have to assume that we have a cash balance. Sometimes that cash balance is zero, but in this example, it's $9,000 in the beginning of February. Now, because we're looking at, we have information from January through April, we can only do a cash budget for February through April. We would need December information to do a January budget. So you have 4 months up there, but you're only doing a cash budget from February through April. And what I've done is I've done it step by step on multiple slides so that you can understand the process. So the first thing I have is I have January in here. And what I did is if you were to go back and remember that you're going to have sales of $35,000 in January, and 30% of them we get this month in cash. So that's the sales in cash this month. If we were to take $35,000 and multiply it by 0.3, we get $10,500. Now we have credit sales of $24,500, and those credit sales we get both in January and February. So our 100% is $24,500. That's 100% credit sales. So if we were to take the $24,500 and multiply it by 0.7, we get $17,150. And if we were to multiply it by 0.3, we get $7,350. What I always do is I always go ahead and re-add up my allocations to make sure that they equal my original number. And that's why you have a total of $35,000. So that way I know that I accounted for all of my numbers, or in this example it's revenues, but it's going to be expenses when we get to expenses. And if you look, the cash sales for the month were in January, so we put those in January, and then 70% of the credit sales were in January, so we put those in January. And really the only number we needed for February was the credit sales for the next month of the $7,350. Again, I go ahead and I put everything into my budget just so I can account for them, and I get kind of a rhythm of putting the numbers down. And if you remember, our beginning cash for February was $9,000, so I put that in. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and color coded all of the months, and I did the remaining months. So if you look at January, it's yellow, and we've already talked about that. And then if you look at February, it's green. And first thing we do in February is we put the cash sales for the month, and that was $9,600 is 30% of $32,000. And then 70% of the remainder of our cash, so 32,000 minus 9,600 times 0.7 is 15,680. And if we took our credit sales again, which are 32,000 minus 9,600, we multiply that by 0.3, we get 6,720. So the cash sales this month and the credit sales this month, because we're doing February, we put in February. And then the credit sales next month, because we're going to get those revenues in March, we put them in under March. And we do the same thing for March and April. And again, at the bottom, I went ahead and I added my three numbers where I separated where I'm getting my revenue to make sure that it all added up. And if, as you can see, My April of $53,000. When I added up those three numbers, I got 53,000. In March, when I added up the 61,000, I got 61,000, and so on. So, like I said, I color coded each month so you can see where how I did my calculations and where those numbers ended up in the cash budget. And now we're going to look at our purchases. So, purchases are pretty simple. We had purchases this month and purchases next month. Uh, since purchases are an expense, I just made those negative numbers so I could just add everything up. And our purchases this month of the $21,000 or $9,450. I think that was 45%, and then 55% of 21,000 is 11,550. So really, the first number for the purchases, the one that goes in January, isn't going to be used in our cash budget. But again, I go ahead and I put them on my budget sheet just so I'm accounting for them. And then I went ahead and I did the same thing for February, March, and April. And as you can see in April, the purchase for next month of $9,350 is not on our cash budget because that would fall into May, and we're not doing a cash budget for May. I haven't done any math as far as figuring out my total cash yet because I haven't taken account all of my expenses. So if we look at this, this is a completed cash budget. And the only difference between this and the last one, if you look at the last numbers of 11,055 or 550 for February, March, and 10,450 for April for purchases next, I just went ahead and put my other cash expenses and my capital expenses and then did the math. Okay, so if you remember right, the other cash expenses and the capital expenses are paid in the month they occur. So we just go ahead and plug those numbers in at 12,000, 10,000, 14,000 for other cash expenses. And for the capital expenses, we had none for February and none for March, but we had a $20,000 purchase in April. And then I went ahead and added up February, or I shouldn't say, I computed February's total cash. So I took the beginning balance of 9,000 and I added in my sales cash this month, my credit sales this month, and my credit sales next month. And then I subtracted out my purchases from this month and my purchases from actually January, which was next month, our other cash expenses, and I have cash of $8,630, which becomes my new March beginning cash balance. And I just went ahead and did the math again, and when you add up all those numbers in March, or I shouldn't say that, when you calculate a sum of all those numbers, you get $33,440. And that becomes our April beginning cash, and we do it again, and at the end of April we have $35,020 of cash to plan with. Okay.